episode of Banking Matters. Today we are excited to have John Ortega on the show. John is joining us from Houston, where he practices law. I'll start with a short introduction, and then we're going to dive right into the conversation. Giancarlo Ortega is the founder and principal of G. Ortega Law, where he focuses on representing banks and middle market companies across a variety of areas, including commercial real estate, lending, securities, corporate governance, compliance, cybersecurity, and contract negotiations. Before establishing his law practice, Mr. Ortega founded Houston Business Bank, where he served as director, president, and CEO. Under his leadership, the bank was one of only 4 charters granted in Texas that year, and among the few to receive FDIC insurance in 2009. With over 20 years of experience in banking and financial services, including roles at JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo, Mr. Ortega recently expanded his influence in the banking sector with the acquisition of Granger National Bank. So we are so excited that you are on the show today, John. I'm really excited to learn from you and to hear about your experience. We always like to start out episodes just by asking you kind of generally to speak to how did you get into banking? What is the value you find from working within this profession? And kind of how can you speak to your career so far?
Yeah, no, I appreciate, first of all, thank you for having me on, Elizabeth, and your whole team. And I really appreciate, and I'm excited about this opportunity to speak to everybody. So interesting. I was not trying to become a banker. I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and I needed a job when I was in high school. And Frost Bank, which was is a local a bank now, it's a very large Texas bank, publicly traded. They offered me a job as a teller, and it worked out because of my school schedule. And so I took that job and I really enjoyed it. So I actually worked in a few teller spots at a retail location near where I live, where I actually took the city bus to get there because I didn't have a car. And then once I got a car, I was promoted to the downtown location. And that was pretty cool because the commercial deposits were much larger and in size. And when you're a teenager and you're counting all that money and have all that responsibility is kind of a cool thing. So, but that kind of was on my resume because I kept up being a teller all through college. And at one point I was a teller for Northwest Bank, which ended up being part of Wells Fargo. So having that retail banking experience on my resume as I started applying for professional jobs, people assume that, hey, you want to be in banking. You have Frost Bank, Northwest Bank, you have this retail experience, and therefore you want to be in banking. So not really. I wanted to be an investment banker. I wanted to go to Wall Street like every finance major out there, but ultimately ended up getting a job with Southwest Bank of Texas here in Houston, Texas, as a credit analyst, and not really understanding what a credit analyst did. But I remember when I interviewed, they flew me down, stayed in a nice hotel across the bank. And when you got to the bank, this was back in the day where everybody wore a suit and tie, and everything was very professional. And as a young college graduate, I got to meet the CEO, which coincidentally I still have a relationship with to this day. And I was so impressed. And then they were telling me all these large loans and transactions and syndications that they got to be a part of, and totally blew my mind, right? Because I had this retail concept of banking, not really understanding the commercial side. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, well, this is as close as I'm going to get to Wall Street. So I was excited, but I didn't get the job. They called me back. And they said, well, we had some other candidates and ahead of you, so we're not going to make you an offer. Well, fast forward, I had accepted a job with Fidelity Investments in Dallas, and I was there my first day of orientation. And Southwest Bank of Texas, a gentleman by the name of Steve Kennedy, calls me back and says I had interviewed with him on campus, and he was head of energy lending, and he said, hey. We'd like to extend the offer. I said, well, I thought I didn't get the job. And he said, no. you were third in line, but the first two candidates didn't accept. So well, we're offering you the job. And I was already there at Fidelity Investments going through orientation and of which I didn't care for anything what they, I just like, oh, I can't believe I'm going to be doing this. This is not what I wanted to do. And so I said, well, when this was like on a Wednesday, Thursday afternoon. And I said, when do I need to be in Houston? He said, Monday. And so I went and talked to the HR folks at Fidelity Investments, and they were very, very pleasantly surprised. They were like, well, normally at this stage, people just don't come back. So the fact that you were, giving us notice and all that, we're going to have you on the rehire list if you ever decide to come back one day. And so I took the job with Southwest Bank of Texas, was trained as a credit analyst, and the rest is history. And again, that gentleman that hired me, Steve Kennedy, he's now retired, but he's now on a couple of boards and does a couple other things. But we still have a friendship to this day. So those relationships were long lasting. So that was over 25 years ago.
I love hearing from bankers, especially folks who have had some experience over the years with a career like yours, about how those relationships come into play. For me, honestly, the only way I got into banking was through community relationships and through proving myself to folks I knew within a professional working capacity. And I love hearing about how we can extend those working relationships. And that's a lot of what matters to us within our work with community banks and with Texas Bankers Association, is that networking, those professional relationships. And I just love hearing people's banking origin stories, because a lot of us kind of stumble into it and then just find a love for it. I'm excited to hear. I didn't realize you started out as a credit analyst, and that kind of segues into something I wanted to ask specifically about, because my understanding is you have some experience with working with problem loans. And I would love to hear either some highlights from your career or some insight you have for bankers now in the current regulatory environment, or not just the regulatory environment, but also the economic environment, for banks that are concerned potentially either about the impacts that problem loans might be having on their banks, or they're just kind of wanting to make sure that they are keeping an eye on their portfolios. Give us your insight into that. What are some things that bankers should be looking at, or some highlights that might be coming up in board meetings or when looking at potential losses in a portfolio right now?
And I'll segue into this, but before I answer that, I was 25 maybe when I had to go collect on the first bad loan I ever, knock on wood, the only loan I ever lost money on was a loan that was approved. It was an accounts receivable loan, and I was out in West Texas for a bank, and I had to go collect receivables all over West Texas, and that was an eye-opening experience. But I'll tell you, we recovered quite a bit of that loan, and the bank still ended up having a good-sized charge-off. But I didn't get fired. Most of the time, the underlining officer will get fired, and I don't think that's fair, because ultimately they don't have the authority to approve the loan, and they didn't. They may have recommended certain covenants and so forth, but they really don't structure. They don't have the authority. They don't. But I will tell you this. I think that and this is not. It's very practical. It's a lot of common sense, but I think that the three biggest takeaways for preventing, I don't say preventing, because you really, if a loan's going to go bad, it's going to go bad. But how you identify to minimize the loss of a bank is that that relationship manager, that banker, has to have a regular conversation with the borrower and has to put eyes on collateral. And there's nothing out there that's more valuable than that. And what that does is that, if a banker is marginally trained, they're going to notice deficiencies in collateral. They're going to notice issues with the company when they go out and visit the company. Personally, I want my bankers in front of the client. I don't want them having lunch with the client at the country club. I want them to go see their place of business. I want them to go kick the tires. I want them to go talk to the employees of the business. And a good banker will do that. And that is the best prevention and mitigant to losing money on a bad deal, because that means the not only is that banker know the people of that company, so if there is a default, those people like the banker, they're working with the banker, they're more accommodating to the banker because they have a personal relationship with them. So it's not just having a personal relationship with the owners of the company, but making sure that you know the key people in that business. And so that's number one, right? Is having that relationship with key people in the business. Number two, when I say kick the tires and go look at your collateral, that's very, very important. A lot of losses comes because the banker didn't do that. And then collateral is sold off, collateral is not taken care of, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you go out there on a regular basis and you see your collateral, that gives you a good fuzzy feeling. But on the flip side, if you're going out there and you're seeing that inventory is low, and things aren't being maintained, et cetera, you start asking the proper questions and you can anticipate a potential problem. Mm-hmm. And I think the third thing is that ultimate personal relationship with the borrower. And that is so key, because people are less likely to walk away when there's a personal relationship, when there is emotion and sentiment involved. When there is, hey, if I don't know my banker never comes out here, I don't really have a relationship with, it doesn't matter, it's a transaction, it's easier for me personally to walk away, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think those three things are critical in the prevention of, or at least the mitigant to the bank losing any money, because you're at the forefront of it, versus if you're not doing those things and there is a problem and there is a default, and if there is a liquidation scenario, you're likely to lose less money if you've been doing those things on a regular basis.
I love that advice, and it honestly, a lot of it does come down to that relationship banking. And I beat that. I hold that banner high all the time. And that, I think, is such a strength of community banks, or any conscientious banker, is, as you said, it's not just kicking the tires on the collateral, it's working with the borrower, it's understanding the borrower, it's not just whining and dining them, like you said, at the country club, but building that relationship so that they have to look you in the eye as well, rather than just ignoring the past due notices that are coming in the mail. Thank you for that. I love hearing both from your personal experience, but also just that very concise summary. You got 3 points. You pulled it out without any prep. I love that. Shifting a little bit, and we hate to talk that there might be an environment where we'd have to be looking at problem loans, but I would love to hear a little bit of your insight into the current banking environment. Are there any regulatory developments or economic developments that you're keeping your eye on right now that you feel are going to be impacting banks in the near future?
The interesting thing about my law practice is that I think last count we represent and do work for over 50 banks, and these are banks of all shapes and sizes. And then I get to take that knowledge and apply it to my own bank, which I think is a tremendous benefit. And it's interesting because no matter how long you've been doing this, every day I learn something. I mean, every day. Before this call, I was in our loan committee, and we're going over a transaction. And I'm just learning about this type of transaction. And so I would say markets are like roller coasters, right? They have ups and they have downs. They have periods of just calmness, right? There's nobody out there that can predict where we're headed and what the repercussions of certain policies and certain administrations are going to be. We can only guess. Very few people have that crystal ball that they know exactly as far as certainty that what's going to happen. So I've always been of the opinion that I, I don't have that uh, prognostication insight or discernment to be able to prognosticate the future. But I will say that if you keep to the fundamentals, um, you're going to be okay. As it relates to today's market, I think there's a lot of optimism in the marketplace as far as community banking and banking is concerned, with somewhat of a deregulation mindset that I think will trickle down to all levels, especially the community bank level.
Mhm.
I just had lunch last week with Congressman French Hill, who's the chairman of the finance committee, and getting his insight on what they're trying to do from a lawmaking standpoint. So there is a lot of optimism, and there's a lot of things that I think will help um, banking overall and kind of loosen up the reins to lend more, which will hopefully stimulate the economy more. Now, whenever there's deregulation or whenever there's loosening, if you will, of the reins, um, there are some banks that tend to lose discipline and focus, and ultimately go out and make riskier loans, and then you have kind of a domino effect. Uh, I had lunch with a large regional bank CEO yesterday, and getting his insight on what they're seeing at his level. They feel pretty confident that banks have been very, very disciplined in the past couple of years, and there hasn't been this precipitous of bad loans and so forth. I see a lot of loan restructuring and bad loans on my end, just because I get that's something our firm does, but it's not to the degree where I can say, oh my gosh, right now that's 50% of our practice, or it's a small part of our practice. There was a point that we felt like it was creeping up, but those were loans that I would say um, were bad loans that during the PPP and idle loan program received a little injection and gave them a little bit more life, but ultimately they were on the downhill slide anyway. So we're seeing some of that across the board, but nothing too major. I think banks have been very, very disciplined in their credit underwriting. They've been disciplined in the way they manage uh, problem loans, and how they try to recover if indeed they have to foreclose or so forth. But I think ultimately there's probably going to be in the next 2 years at least, I would guess, if deregulation does continue the way that they're saying, there's going to be an influx of loans and capital in the marketplace, which whenever that happens, there's going to be some folks that get a little greedy and get undisciplined, and then you have some bad loans. So I would say maybe there'll be a cycle here in the next couple of years where you'll have some problem loans. You would think that banks over the years and cycles learn, but people have a growth strategy. They want to grow. Hey, this looks good now, and then it may not be good later down the road.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And when you have to hold yourself to that self-discipline, the integrity of the management decisions and the bank's internal policy and procedures really come into play. And yeah, there's always going to be some of those bad decisions. But it is encouraging to see just across the board the sound practices that folks are making business decisions within each bank. Every bank has a different market strategy, a different lending area. Everyone has to make their own decision for their own business purposes. So it's interesting to see how that's going to look a little bit different depending on each bank. But some of those underlying principles are the same. And what you laid out, I keep going back to those 3 bullet points that you laid out in our first question, because I love to think very logically, and I love when you can kind of summarize something into a couple of set summarize a lifetime of experience into a couple of set bullet points, that's a real skill. So thank you for your very concise answers and summarizing a lot of experience in a very concise way.
Thank you.
I would love to ask you one more question before we wrap up. You've given us relevant insight. You've spoken to quite a few different parts of your career. We like to ask guests, what is one piece of advice you would give bankers right now?
That's a good one. I think it again boils down to the fundamentals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in banking, the fundamentals of credit, if you recall, are you have your character, you have your cash flow, collateral. I think those things are timeless, right? I think those fundamentals were put in place for a reason, and it's when we lose sight of those that bankers tend to get in trouble. And sometimes we try to, especially I see it on the community bank side. Look, we have, what people don't understand is that whether you're a community bank or a Wall Street bank, banking is a very sophisticated, regulated business. It's unlike any other business out there. And this is why I'm so passionate about banking, because it's very unique. And so that being said, community bankers have to remember, look, we don't have to be JP Morgan Chase. We don't have to be Goldman Sachs. We are already at the top of the tier and peer group as it relates to sophistication in business. So we don't have to try to get creative and come up with fancy structures to make us feel better. That, hey, look, we can do this and this type of loan. No, stick to the basics, stick to the fundamentals. It's no different than football, right? Or any sport for that matter. I coach my boys in football, and I've been coaching them since they were in kindergarten. And we every year, without fail, we stick to the fundamentals, right? Conditioning, right? We don't want to run out of gas in the fourth quarter. Blocking and tackling. I mean, you talk about the basics, and if you look at the national champions and NFL Pro Bowlers, I mean, they still work on the fundamentals even at their level. And so I think as bankers, we can't forget the fundamentals, and we need to stick to the fundamentals to make sure that our business is safe and sound.
I love that. Show up to practice. Put in your due diligence, put in your practice, listen to the coach, and it's all going to be okay.
Absolutely.
I love that. Well, John, our time here has gone very quickly, and I really appreciate what you've shared. I love hearing from different people working in different parts of the industry. I'm fascinated with the work you've done where you've had experience in the bank. You're now providing legal counsel. It sounds like you work with such a wide variety of banks, and I think that sounds like it's got to be fun every day. And I know we work in I call it a nerdy profession. I'm not going to call anyone else a nerd, but it's an intellectual profession. And I love hearing from folks like you who are really passionate about the work we do. We impact people on a daily basis in the work we do. And I appreciate hearing from you, your wisdom, your insight over several years of a career. Thank you for appearing on the podcast. It's been our pleasure to have you here, and I appreciate your time.
No, thank you so much, and I appreciate you putting this together for the industry. I think it's a great thing, and have a great day. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Folks, that's it for this episode. We hope you tune in next time, and thank you for listening to Banking Matters.